So we were talking about the fact that this area here in the east is really characterized by some very rugged and difficult to cross valleys and rivers. Okay? And that's one part of what is basically a natural fence around this area. The landforms in this area have created a boundary, and that boundary around this area created some isolation and it affected the culture patterns of this area. So, what are these other two parts? Okay, well, over here in the west, we have an area of desert. Okay? And I have included this diagram in the module. I've also linked it right by the slides. Okay? So, you'll want to label this. Over here, we've got deserts. This is largely the area where Pakistan is. This area gets a whole lot less rain because of the way that the wind flows. You don't need to worry about it. This area overall gets less orographic precipitation because the mountains are lower. And so this is an area of desert, which is not impossible to cross, but it did provide a partial barrier and slowed people down. Okay? So there's the first piece of our natural fence. The second piece we have already talked about, right? This area here that's created through the collision of the plates, the world's highest mountains. We've got the Himalayas in this area. Okay. So desert, mountain, and then over here in the east, we have those rivers and remote and hard to cross valleys. So these three taken together then created a natural fence around the region. There were always people who moved back and forth across them, but it created isolation, it slowed people down, and it meant that a distinct culture evolved in this area that was different than what was around it. Okay, so this area developed a whole lot of cultural independence and difference from the surrounding regions. And this is, of course, another reason that we define South Asia as its own region, not joined with other parts of Asia. One of these pieces of cultural independence, of difference from what is around this area, is the fact that this area is where Hinduism. I'm so sorry. This is where Hinduism evolved. And along with Hinduism, there were some other unique cultural ideas like the caste system. The caste system is those levels of within society. It's a hierarchy where there are people who are the elite at the very top, the priests and the Brahmins, and at the very bottom there are the Dalits or the untouchable people, right? And each one of those levels has associated jobs. It affected every aspect of people's lives, from again what job people had to who they married to where they could live. So this caste system is unlike what was around it. Hinduism is unlike the religions, other religions in the area. And a huge reason that these distinctive cultural pieces evolved this way is because of this link between physical and cultural geography. That partial isolation over land is what allowed this cultural independence to develop. There was one big exception to this idea of cultural isolation, however, and you can probably see it on the map, right? Okay, so people were slowed down by land, but what about all the water, right? We've got a peninsula here. There's a huge amount of access by water, and that is very true. Sailors crossed the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. There were Muslim traders coming from the west over here. They brought Islam, and the area was later conquered by a Muslim empire, which is why we have so many Muslims in this area. And there was also trade over here from the east, from Southeast Asia, and from places like China. So even though there were a lot fewer contacts overall by land, there were contacts by water. Okay? But because there was that isolation, because of the physical realities of this area, we do have cultural distinctiveness. So that's what I said, right? There's a lot of connectivity, but a lot of isolation. Okay? And that isolation really ended through water as well, because the British came sailing into this area and brought colonization. And it started out as the British East India Company, and that basically became an arm of the British government. And then the British government came in and controlled this area. And they controlled not just India, they controlled the areas that are now Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. And this era, this period of colonial British rule, is called the Raj. Okay, so the Raj is the area, the period, excuse me, the period of British control in this area. And you can see that effect of these successive waves of exposure. The fact that Muslim merchants and then a Muslim empire came in, the fact that the British came in, you can see this on the cultural landscape along with kind of more ancient parts of architecture and culture in this area. And this picture does a pretty nice job of capturing some of those waves. We've got some pretty ancient architecture here, maybe from a Muslim area or era, or maybe from earlier. And then we have a very British building here from the Raj, and then we've got a more modern building. So you can see the successive waves of cultural impacts on the cultural landscape. Here's another picture that shows this. I love this picture. This is one of my favorite ways to talk about cultural landscape because you can see the past here, right? This here is a mosque. Look, there's minarets. Right? We got minarets in a mosque. And so you have the presence of Islam on the cultural landscape. But then what are these boys doing in the foreground? What are they playing? Kid has a cricket bat, right? And there's the ball. So they're playing cricket. Cricket is a game that was brought by the British. So we've got two hugely important pieces of the cultural landscape right there in that single picture. And we will start talking about other patterns of culture in the next section of lectures.